Hello, BookTube. All right, we're going to try this. I'm down here in puppy territory, and it's to start a library bookshelf tour, to restart one, really, because I did a library tour of my biography section here a long time ago, but it came up in a recent video that it has been a long time, and there are thousands more of you here than were there before, and also even the people who've been here this whole time, I can't reasonably expect to go digging through 2,000 videos to find what they might be interested in looking for. So I am, as the kids say, re-upping this. And the books have moved around a bit. The biography section changes less than any other section that I have except Penguin Classics, because these aren't fly-by-night things. I absolutely love biography. It's my favorite genre of writing. And I also return to these books over and over again. So although the books may shift around just because of where I put them back, their roster doesn't really change. I'd be willing to bet that 95% of the books that we do this time around will be the same books as were in the last time. But we shall see. It's also a little reminder to me that spring is gradually, grudgingly arriving, and then with it will come slightly warmer temperatures. It won't be freezing cold, and so I will be far more likely to go out and add to this biography collection. I'd certainly like to do that. I'd like a nice big extra biography bookcase, specifically for that. But in the meantime, we're going to start with shelf number 1. So this will be Biography Bookshelf Tour Redux, shelf number 1. And we'll start with this huge thing from Yale University Press, exactly the kind of thing that we have to love university presses for, because they do this sort of thing, this sort of massive undertaking that a more commercial publisher might balk at doing. This is a book by Ali Alawali, and it is a gigantic biography of King Faisal I. And it's incredibly good reading. It's also incredibly comprehensive. Most people who know anything about Faisal will know him as a bit player in the story of Lawrence of Arabia. And there's a lot more to his story than that. And this is I've read one other biography of him, and this just blows that away, blows everything else that I've read in bits and pieces of him in other books away. It's just what you want from a 1-volume doorstop biography. Everything that you want to know about the person, judiciously presented. So I, as a little waggish point, I made sure to put it in the collection next to a biography of Lawrence of Arabia. This is A Prince of Our Disorder. It's one of, I think, 3 Lawrence of Arabia biographies that I have. And this one is probably the most readable of them all. There's also an official biography, and I also have somewhere a little paperback of a hit job biography. Just a delicious hit job biography. And I regularly consult them all, but in terms of recommending, well, not regularly, I consult my Lawrence of Arabia biographies when I have need of writing about Lawrence of Arabia. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, because of who he is, that happens a lot. That happens often. But when people ask me what I recommend, much as it pains me, I don't recommend the authorized biography. It's big, and I really like it, but as I mentioned the last time I did this library book tour, I have a weak spot for authorized biographies. Most readers of biography consider them anathema, just because they're sure to be vetted by the subject's family and estate, and they're sure to be in the most circumspect and therefore most boring prose. Maybe that's true. That could possibly be true, but I have a sweet spot for them anyway. But this is the one that I recommend. If people want to know, okay, I'm not you. I'm not going to read 15 biographies of Lawrence of Arabia. If you had to pick one, it can be anything, in print or out of print, I will find it. What's the one you would recommend? It would be this one. So I'm amazed that I still have a copy. But then again, this is the biography section of my library. So it tends to be exempt from giving away. I really, really like giving books to people. If I recommend something to someone, I like to go the extra mile and also give it to them. That way I figure my obligation to this whole thing is done. I am basically a preacher man for the things I believe in. And if I only recommend the book, I've only done a part of the job. If I recommend the book and send it to the person, then I've covered everything that I can do. I can't make them read it. And that, as we've seen on this channel endlessly, that tends to mean that I'm forever looking for books in my own collection that aren't there anymore because I've given them away. But that tends not to happen in the biography section. Then the next one, I have many biographies of this person scattered throughout this collection. Maybe this would be a good opportunity to redo this and get them all into one place. This is by James Clifford, and it is Dictionary Johnson. And it's a story. It's not Dr. Johnson's whole life. It's the story of the part of his life that really mattered. His more modern biographers love to look at the end of his life, the weird codependent relationships, the sprawling, ramshackle household with members coming and going, the sieving through money. And I think they want to look at the end of that life in a way. I agree that it is interesting, especially as a study of the awkwardnesses of old age. Not just then, but now. I mean, if you're Dr. Johnson and you're getting old, what do you do? Who's going to take care of you? How are you going to make sure that there's money? But really, the most important part of his life was when he was making and cementing his reputation as the foremost intellect of his day. And that's what this is. That's what the title is meant to. This is the time when he was compiling and writing his great dictionary. And he was also writing a bunch of other stuff and was on everyone's tongues. He was on everyone's reading table. And that's what this book concentrates on. I have a bunch of other Johnson books that concentrate on different parts of his life. They really all ought to be together. This next one is a great biography by a great biographer of a great sculptor. This is St. Gaudens in the Gilded Era by Louise Hall Tharp. Not the last time that we will see her in this library tour. This is her biography of the great sculptor, Augustus St. Gaudens, whose works, I'm sure that if you were to look at 10 of them in a row, you would recognize at least 2. I love his work. It's classical, it's dignified, it's awe-inspiring, it's heroic. It's all the stuff that late 20th century sculpture is very definitely not. And the world of contemporary art in the mid 20th century on has succeeded not only in foisting their garbage on the buying public, but also in changing the discourse to say that this sort of thing is outdated, that it belongs in a museum, but it doesn't have the power to move anybody. That's absolutely not true, and you shouldn't let anyone say that. You shouldn't let your own visual reactions to things be trained right out of you, and unfortunately, that has happened. So as far as I know, we don't have any sculptors like him working today. They wouldn't get commissions. If you're sculpted to do a portrait of a famous person, then you do a block of wood. You carve a gigantic 20-foot by 20-foot block of granite with some squiggly lines on it. And you unveil it for your investors, and they say, I thought this was a commission of, Joe Flemish. And the artist disdainfully says, it is him. And the investors, and then later on the public, at the public unveiling, because they have been trained by modern art, say, oh yeah. Well, no, it's a piece of junk. And your saying that it's not doesn't make it. Anyway, how did I get on a rant? Book 2 so early in this thing. Let's move on, Joe. Oh, okay. Next one is by Damien Searles. This is a life of Rorschach, not the mask-wearing psychotic vigilante in Alan Moore's The Watchmen, but rather the guy who invented the Rorschach plots. And he died fairly young, and as this biography taught me and the rest of the reviewing world, to our surprise, he was also a super hottie. And this is the only biography of him that I know of in English, and it takes us through his whole life, and tons of correspondence, wonderful reading experience. I think I have the paperback here somewhere. The paperback ought to be near this. Okay. All right. This next one is by Paul Brooks. It is 2 Park Street, a publishing memoir. This is his slim memoir, which he illustrated himself, of the early years of Houghton Mifflin, when they were right on Boston Common. They were on Park Street, right on Boston Common. I've been in those rooms, and some of them are fairly similar, and a lot of the windows are the same, so that you can look and see the views that the people at Houghton Mifflin had of the trees and the park in all seasons. And he, in this little memoir, he talks about the authors and about the ins and outs of publishing in the day 100 years ago, and he also talks about the crankiness of the building. in all weathers, and it's delightful. It's delightful. Not sure that it should be in the biography section. It really ought to be over my shoulder is the little book room, and it really ought to be in there because I love it so much. Okay. This is by G.J. Meyer. This is the Borgias. This is a fantastic history that takes as its starting point, that starts with the assumption that we don't know anything about the Borgias. Let's go to the sources, the classic Italian Renaissance motto, ad fontes. Let's go to the sources. Let's go straight to what we know and question the sources rather than believe them. Question the claims rather than repeat them. The Borgias, of course, if you've seen any bad TV miniseries or if you've read any bad biography, if you've read a ton of bad historical fiction, you will associate them immediately with incest and conniving and especially poison. Lucrezia Borgia has gone down in history as a famous poisoner. And this book takes as nothing assumed and goes at the original story of the Borgias from the beginning and does a fantastic job in showing how much of that was anti-Borgia propaganda that has just codified into history. I read lots of books on this sort of the Italian Renaissance in English, and the English language market tends to crop up pretty much the same kind of books over and over again, and I'm duty bound to read them. I would anyway, out of interest. There's a new Borgia biography coming out later this year. So I read every one of these things, and this one was one of the only ones I've ever read that felt new, that felt like I was seeing this, like a biographer or a historian was doing the right kind of thing. And the other one was a 2-volume biography of Isabella d'Este that was written 100 years ago. So these kinds of clear-eyed revisionary approaches don't have to be modern. This next one is so wonderful. I wish I had it in a dust jacket. I will someday. The Brattle will provide. This is Isabel Anderson's book. I don't know if you can make it out. Presidents and Pies. And this is her story of being a Washington hostess. She was the wife of a diplomat. And she knew President Theodore Roosevelt, and she knew William Howard Taft. And not just to nod to on the mall, but also to have in her house, to have at dinners, to talk and chat with. She was part of official Washington. And this is her account of that. And it's delightful. Just delightful. I am sure someday a copy with a dust jacket will crop up at the Brattle. That's what I really want. I had to. This is an ex-library copy, as you can see. It's an ex-library copy, and I had to put tape around it because it was kind of fraying, and so another copy would be great. Okay, this next one is a great biographer. One of the great biographers of modern times, I think, even though he was purely popular and went from subject to subject. He wasn't a specialist. He was a gun for hire. I just credit him all the more with that. He's done a bunch of books that I really like. His biography of Robert Louis Stevenson is the best one, I think. And this one is right up there. This is Frank McLynn, and this is his biography of Marcus Aurelius. Big fat thing. Also from Yale? No, from Da Capo. I got the advanced copy of this and poured all over it. Then I got the finished copy and reviewed it. And then I got rid of the finished copy. And now I have the trade paperback. And it's... in English, it is a little surprising how few books like this there are. How few one-volume, big, elaborate life and times English language biographies of Roman emperors there are. It's kind of surprising to me. You get a regular stream of them on Julius Caesar, although even there, Julius Caesar hasn't had one in quite some time. There was one a long time ago, about 10 years ago, maybe more than that. But who else? Like this, not a scholarly treatise, but like this. This is a lovely job, in addition to the fact that McLynn is a fantastic writer. He's a fantastic biographer. It doesn't have to be him. I'm willing to let him have some time off. But it always amazes me how seldom this happens. Here we have Marcus Aurelius, but what about... Well, you know the roster as well as I do, and it confuses me. I wonder if it's because mainstream publishers think that the reading public will associate Roman emperors with boring school. I don't know. This next one is I need to find a hardcover copy of this sooner or later. I think I did at one point, and maybe it was just falling apart, and I ripped and tore it and made a trade paperback out of it. But I love this book. It's a very companionable thing. So the next time I see a hardcover with a dust jacket at the Brattle, I will just grab it. This is by Lionel Stevenson, and it's The Showman of Vanity Fair. This is a life of William Makepeace Thackeray. And again, Thackeray is a major author, a major innovator, one of the founding pillars of the novel in English. And I believe that this came out it's not saying, but this came out in the 1940s. And I believe this is the last biographies that he's ever had. And that's a long time. That's going on a century without one popular biography of this guy, which is kind of crazy, especially since it would be new. A new biography of him would be different from this one. A lot of the ways we think about him, a lot of the ways that his influence on literature has been charted, has changed in the 70 years since this came out. So I'm going to try not to make this whole biography shelf tour one long protracted complaint about the people who don't have biographies yet. This next one has had many biographies. He started by writing his own, and this is a corker of one. This is Paul, a biography of St. Paul by N.T. Wright. And Tom Wright he's a fantastic writer, first of all, very dramatic but very serious, and he's also one of the foremost authorities that exists on St. Paul. He's written enormous books, and I mean, but even by my standards, enormous books on Paul and Paul's writings and Paul's world and Paul's theology. This was him just stopping and saying, okay, let's pause and just write a biography. In case there are people out there who don't want to read a 1,700-page work, let's just write a biography of Paul. What we know, what the influence is, all that sort of stuff. Very, very good. Very, very good. I'm a fan of N.T. Wright anyway. Then we have a book by Sebastian de Gracia. It won the Pulitzer Prize for biography. It is downright strange. And I press it on people, even though I usually don't do that sort of thing, because strange books people tend to quit on. And my job, my goal, my life is to make people not quit on books. So, but when people say, I want to read something really good but not the usual thing about this person, I of course recommend this book. This is Machiavelli in Hell. This is Sebastian de Gracia's look at Machiavelli in a totally unconventional way. It's not, in the last 5 years, there have been 3 or 4 biographies of Machiavelli. And this is not conventional. This is a biography of ideas, really, conceptual, hard to explain. De Gracia is a fantastic writer. He also did a book called The Country with No Name, that if you're an American, you really ought to read it. This is the closest he's ever come to a full-dress conventional book, and it isn't very close. Instead, he traces Machiavelli's life and mind in wonderfully surreal ways. Just a weird and wonderful reading experience. Very, very surprising that it won the Pulitzer, and very deserving of attention. This next one is a biography of Clare Boothe Luce. That's her, and she was a totally remarkable figure. She has a multi-volume biography that's more recent than this that I very much liked. But this is by Wilfred Sheed, who didn't do a multi-volume biography, didn't consult all the sources, didn't go to all of the record boxes in various upstate New York houses, but he compensated for that by being a great writer. Now, Wilfred Sheed is not known today. I'm pretty sure that everything he wrote is out of print, and that's a terrible shame, because he wrote a lot of nonfiction that was first-rate, and he wrote some fiction that was first-rate as well. And this was a biography that he wrote. He went and stayed with Clare Boothe Luce, interviewed her, and wrote this slim thing. And the reason that I have it instead of the multi-volume is because it's much better. Just as a reading experience, it's much better. Just, line by line, the prose. Okay, when we talk about line by line inviting prose, okay, this next one is an autobiography. It's I'd Do It Again. You can't really make it out, the title. I'd Do It Again by James Michael Curley, the legendary mayor of Boston. Who really, you should read The Purple Shamrock and Jack Beatty's book on him, but you really can't do, if you're curious about James Michael Curley, you really can't do without reading his own book, because it's his voice captured on the page. That weird combination of ham and histrionics and humor that is just unique in Boston political history. He's an amazing character. still some marks of him, even now, in the city that he did his best to fleece. He's an amazing, amazing character. Sort of the unofficial inspiration for Frank Skeffington in Edwin O'Connor's great novel, The Last Hurrah. But one of the rare cases where no fiction could possibly outdo reality. His reality is incredible. And we're almost done. We're almost done with this first shelf. The next one is someone you've heard me praise on this channel many, many times. This is by James Harris, and it's an intellectual life of David Hume. It's really kind of, in a way, the only kind of life you could write of David Hume, and this one is amazing. Hume's had a few biographies, and usually they've struck me as so off the mark that when people ask me, do you recommend it, have asked me in the past, do you recommend those other biographies, I usually end up saying, well, you know what you really ought to do is just read Hume. Don't bother with these books. But this book is an incredibly intelligent guide through the intellectual world of David Hume, which is the world he mostly inhabited and that he mostly affected. So if you're interested in David Hume and you want to read not just him, but about him, I would recommend this above anything else. The only reason that I seem to hesitate is because this is not a popular biography. This is not a narrative biography. This is not the book I would like. There's a 900-page David Hume biography that I would like that has not appeared. This would be tough to recommend to someone who hasn't read either all of Hume or a lot of biography or both. And so that makes me hesitate just a little. Whereas if I had, like for instance, the David Hume equivalent of this, I would recommend it to everybody under the sun, and just so they know how indebted they are to him, without knowing it. But anyway, I had to have this, of course, and I think I reviewed it as well. And then this next one has a familiar title. It is, in my opinion, the only example of this title that should ever be allowed, and all the rest should be moratoriumed forever. This is Charles Nicholl, the great Charles Nicholl, and this is his book, The Reckoning. And it's about the murder of Christopher Marlowe. It's about Marlowe's death. The thumbnail version that everybody's familiar with is that Marlowe died in a tavern brawl in Deptford over the reckoning, which the word was the word for the bill. That he was arguing over the bill, and one of the men in the room stabbed him above the eye and killed him. And that end result has never been satisfying. That story, that thumbnail, has never been satisfying. Marlowe lived in the streets and alleyways of Elizabethan in England at its most dangerous. Of course, he would not die in a knife fight over a hotel bill. And Nicholl uses this book to just thrillingly investigate everything that can possibly be known, not only about what happened in that room, but about who the other men were who were there with Marlowe. The thumbnail sketch says, friends or distant acquaintances plus the landlady. And Nicholl finds that is not true at all. These people were extremely shadowy operatives who were almost certainly there for the purpose of killing Christopher Marlowe. I say almost, but the case that Nicholl lays down in this book is about as conclusive as it can be, absent a time machine. This is, again, I wouldn't say that it's completely approachable for a complete beginner, but maybe not. Nicholl's a fantastic writer, so I might be wrong about that. But the sheer thrill of watching him just tear away at accepted knowledge, just dig into the records, is amazing. Just amazing. I reread this regularly when I don't think. I reread it so regularly and so exclusively that I don't think my biography section has any other biographies of Christopher Marlowe. Because this just sort of is so much better than all the rest of them as a reading experience that I don't even bother. But anyway, there you go. That's it. That is shelf number 1 of the Library Bookshelf Tour Redux for 2019. And if you liked this, then we'll just go on. We'll just keep doing it. We'll do the whole of the biography section all over again. Because it has been years, so maybe that's called for. Maybe we all ought to do that. To keep a reminder in our minds, those of us especially who've been doing BookTube a while, that every week new people are finding all of our channels, and so maybe a little judicious repetition of our material might be a good idea. There are little ways to mix it up, but maybe so. So, well, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I will be back. We have plenty of other stuff to talk about. Thank you, BookTube.